Well, let's invite Ritika Mankar, the economist of institutional equities at Ambit Capital. Good morning, Ritika. Thank you very much for joining us. First up, it at the moment doesn't look like what the exit polls told us. The leads are looking like it could be 2-1 in favor of the BJP. If that happens, what should one expect in terms of policy, and what would your advice be to investors?
Hi Lata, I think what's relatively clear at this point in time is, as we get into the details of the research piece I was highlighting to you earlier, what's relatively clear at this point in time is, from a 2019 general elections perspective, the BJP vote share has to go down from the 31% high that it achieved the last time around. And that in turn means that, give or take, in a base case scenario, you get a BJP-led coalition coming in. So given that, I think what the markets need to be cognizant of is to what extent will the BJP vote share diminish in 2019 as a result of what happens at the state election results today, and what happens in terms of alliance building as a result of the state election results today. So I think those are the two key pointers that I'm going to be looking at basis what we see in the state elections today.
Ritika, hi, good morning. What about the RBI governor's resignation? What kind of impact do you see that have on the money markets? And now with this, the 14 December RBI board meeting, I guess, assumes more importance. What would you expect from that, if it is not deferred?
So I think, in declining order of importance, I'd say the market that will be most adversely affected as a result of the events of the last 24 hours has to be the currency market. The second piece, I think, is likely to be the bond market, and the third piece, I'd say, is the equity market. The currency market and the impact will be most meaningful because the moment currency markets realize that there isn't a particularly independent central bank, then there is a risk of shorts building up against the currency in the short term. The reason why I worry about the bond market is simply because, remember, we've not had a resurrection of the Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management Act materialize, despite a lot of pressure on that front. And in the absence of the Fiscal Responsibility Budget Management Act, to my mind, what really prevented the central government from, not being fiscally disciplined was the fact that, hey, if I'm too fiscally indisciplined, then the Reserve Bank of India will have to have a fairly tight monetary policy stance. So I think that's the reason why bond markets might worry as a result of the fact that we don't have a central bank governor as we speak. The fact that in the run-up to a general election, where we historically have anyway seen revenue expenditure per cup, and top of that you have problems in terms of the central bank, what happens to the supply of government paper. And the third piece, I'd say, is the equity market. While from a long-term perspective, clearly there will be a lot of worries with respect to credibility of institutions, particularly in an emerging market country like India. In the short term, you may as well have a situation where there is a top-line growth headwind that comes particularly for B2C facing sectors, to the extent that, if revenue expenditure growth grows even more this year than it has already been growing, and on top of that you have the bank, the Reserve Bank becoming more supportive on credit growth, then in the short term you could get a growth spurt. But hey, any long-term investor will always be more concerned about the credibility of institutions coming under pressure.
Okay. Immediately, what's your sense about growth itself? If there is, as you say, a greater amount of liquidity given, maybe a line of credit to NBFCs, or simply more banks pulled out of PCA, that should be growth positive, you think?
So I'd say that, let's start from 2Q FY19, because that's the last growth figure that we have at hand. I do think that 3Q FY19 you could actually see a pickup in terms of growth, not just because it becomes the festive quarter, but also because of the various factors that do become supportive, be it revenue expenditure or maybe, something from the perspective of the Reserve Bank of India. But Lata, we are fairly clear that for FY20, we expect GDP growth to come under a degree of pressure I'm looking at a 90 to 100 bips slowdown in FY20 as compared to FY19, and two very clear reasons for that. First and foremost, there is very incisive evidence which suggests that while revenue expenditure growth from the central government picks up in the run-up to a general election, it almost always slows down post-general elections because the new government wants to keep dry powder for the next general election cycle. So that becomes adverse. And number two, I think that from an NBFC credit growth perspective, even as NBFCs withdraw from the market, their market share declines in the total credit pie, banks take a degree of time to essentially come back. So that's the two reasons why we think GDP growth comes under a degree of pressure in FY20 as compared to FY19, even though you might get a slight perk up in 3Q versus 2Q.
Okay, Ritika, thanks for stopping by. I understand you do have a meeting, so we'll let you go on that note. So that's the word coming in from an economist. The bond markets and the money markets could be impacted given the resignation.